Good evening. This is the Danish pavilion in Shanghai, which was World Expo in 2010, that was dedicated to sustainable cities. We came up with the idea to actually focus on examples from Danish cities that not only make Danish cities more sustainable, but also make them more enjoyable, make them more fun to live in. So we introduced the city bikes. That means that you can enjoy the thrill of biking through your city instead of being stuck in a traffic jam. Also making it the ideal museum for impatient people, because you could do the whole thing in 5 minutes. Also, we introduced the Copenhagen harbor bath. Essentially this idea that a clean harbor is not only good for the fish, it's also very nice for the people living in the city. So we actually sort of allowed the Chinese to experience how clean, if not how cold, Danish harbor water is. And finally, to lure them in, we actually brought the Little Mermaid to China. First, we had to wrest her out of the hands of the Danish People's Party, and then we had to get her through the Chinese customs, and finally we got her to China. But essentially, we call this idea hedonistic sustainability. Basically, that sustainable cities or buildings or design not only it has a moral strength, but it could also be more enjoyable. The idea that I'd like to talk about tonight is what we call social infrastructure. And to explain the idea, we all know that the industry, the infrastructure of the industry of our past, once it gets shut down or gets decommissioned, we can transform it into something for the social or cultural space of today. This is a former dry dock next to Hamlet's castle Kronborg that we turned into the Danish Maritime Museum. And this space where they used to build ships, now that they don't build ships anymore, of course it's a great space to experience the history of shipping, but it has also become a new cultural space for the cultural life of Elsinore. It's actually also a venue for outdoor concerts. And you have this sort of coexistence of the history and the future of Elsinore. You even have this sort of inverse Titanic moment. But essentially thinking that once we decommission the infrastructure, it actually serves perfectly for our urban life or social life. So one thing we thought, like for instance, like once we decommission a container, this is a shipping container, when it's decommissioned after having sailed a few times around the earth, you can buy it for 2,000 euros in Amsterdam. And we got this idea to use 9 containers, stack them on 2 levels, configure them around a central courtyard, and suddenly they become amazing student homes. This is our first prototype here in Copenhagen. We built it in Poland, dragged it across the Baltic Sea into the port of Copenhagen. It means that a student for around 700 euros per month can actually have a waterfront home. You can like jump through your window into the clean water, and you can actually come back into your house. So essentially this idea of mobilizing the sort of infrastructure for shipping as a way to respond to a social challenge, how to provide affordable homes in our big cities. Right behind it, you can see a building that we're building right now, which is essentially a power plant that transforms household waste into electricity and district heating. It's also going to be the tallest and biggest building in Copenhagen. It's going to replace the power plant you see in the background. It's right next to Copenhagen Cable Park, where people water ski. And we thought, how can we turn this into an asset for the community? And obviously we have snow, as you can see outside here in Copenhagen, but we have absolutely no mountains. But apparently we have mountains of waste. So we have to go for hours by car to the south of Sweden, but this is Isabel, but we can actually create 2/3 of the main ski slope in Isabel on the roof of this power plant. We designed a power plant complete with hiking paths, pine trees. Miraculously, we actually won the competition based on this proposal. Not only is it for skiing, you probably all remember that we won 0 medals in Sochi. We hope to be able to change that because now we can practice, or next year. But also it's going to be a public park. Anyone is welcome to hike, picnic, enjoy the view of the otherwise horizontal skyline of Copenhagen. It will have the tallest climbing wall in the world, 100 meters. So it's almost turning Copenhagen into a man-made ecosystem where our resources come back, the waste becomes energy. As you probably noticed, it's starting to become reality. The reason that we could win the competition based on this seemingly insane idea is because the coolest thing about this power plant is it's going to be the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. So there are no toxins coming out of the chimney, only a small amount of steam and a small amount of CO2. So to really transform people's perception of a power plant, we designed the chimney in such a way that it accumulates steam, and then at regular intervals it puffs a gigantic smoke ring or a ring of steam. So rather than being a symbol of all of the failures of our society and our technology, all the stuff that is wasted, it becomes a celebration of our successes, that every time we've reduced the emissions of CO2 with 1 ton by converting to this technology, we celebrate it by puffing a gigantic smoke ring. So how can these ideas translate to outside, social democratic Denmark? We got invited to design a building on the waterfront Manhattan, where we said, why don't we combine the density of an American skyscraper with the communal space of a typical Copenhagen courtyard into what we have nicknamed the court scraper. But essentially, it's this sort of warped hybrid between a typical Copenhagen a city block with a big garden in the middle of it. It actually has the same proportions as Central Park, only it is 13,000 times smaller. But almost like creating this little oasis of Danish city life right next to the West Side Highway and the waterfront of Manhattan. So having sort of moved to America and opened our office there, after a short while, Hurricane Sandy arrived and wiped out all of Lower Manhattan. And we got invited for a competition to imagine how we could protect Manhattan from the next Sandy, but in a way that it wouldn't become like a seawall segregating the life of the city from the water around it. And we looked around New York, and we were very much inspired by the High Line, which is the second most popular park in New York right now, only after Central Park. And it is essentially a piece of social infrastructure. It's decommissioned train tracks that have been granted another layer of social and environmental programs. So we thought, what if we could imagine the resiliency infrastructure of Manhattan in such a way that we don't have to wait until it gets decommissioned before it becomes nice? What if we can actually design it from the beginning so it actually has positive social and environmental side effects? So we devised a strategy where we reached out to representatives of all of the community groups living on the waterfront of Manhattan, and we sort of interviewed them about their experience of Sandy, what were their concerns for the future of their neighborhood, and then we used the necessity of protecting the city from flooding as a way to actually upgrade their waterfront. And we've made a short film where you can see some of the people we worked with, hear their experiences, and see how it might transform their future city.
That was actually why Sandy was so bad is because of the phase of the moon, it was already a very large high tide, as well as the storm surge coming in with the wind and the tide lining up perfectly to give us 14-foot tides instead of 8-foot.
The most shocking part of Hurricane Sandy was the fact that it exceeded expectations.
I think the sheer magnitude of it caught a lot of people off guard.
When Hurricane Sandy came, we were not prepared at all. I mean, not even the slightest.
Yeah, it was like an alien invasion of water. And not the good kind of water.
So yeah, I mean, it came right in front where there was literally boats on 14th Street floating in front of our window.
We had a sub-basement level office a block from here, and it was totally covered in water for 2 days. So we lost everything. Everything.
We're really concerned about another storm and the flooding that's possible, and we think that the next time it's going to come even further inland.
I'd like to see some type of flood protection in this area. That's going to happen. We're vulnerable, obviously, being this close to the water.
Something that just brings like more different walks of life, you know, another escape from just the busyness and the hustle and bustle.
There's this great space that could really become community space, cultural space, and active uses.
Everyone enjoys space. And in New York and other congested cities, it's hard to come by.
Anything that makes the cities greener is just such a wonderful thing for not only the environment, but the people that live in the city too, to be able to be around that space.
The plans, the berming, the sense of how it can become into the natural landscape itself, how we want to program that is really the next challenge. We are the link. We're the tip, in a sense, of the big U. It's important that the entire waterfront of Lower Manhattan build in the plans that have been put forward, because we can not only fortify this great city of New York, but be a model for cities all over the world.
So this project, we're now designing the first 2/3 of the big U, or the dry line, as we've called it, and I think you can see it as the sort of the ultimate, almost like urban implementation of the idea of social infrastructure, like an idea that we have sort of given birth to here in Copenhagen and in Denmark. And is now being implemented to show how, let's say, practicality can almost become poetry, and how we can actually mobilize our most fundamental needs to use them as a vehicle to realize our most creative dreams. Thank you.